I'd like to start by running down distinguished panelists here one at a time. And if you could introduce yourselves for the audience, please.
Hi, my name's Ben Lenihan. I'm the president of the New Zealand eSports Federation. And I'm also a lawyer. And that's my day job. So right now we're purely a volunteer organisation. And we're just interested in basically advocating for the recognition of esports and the funding of esports. We've also got a national team called the E-Blacks, who we've sent over to Korea. And we're also looking at, trying to put in place sort of more structure around esports and how they happen with regulations and things like that. So.
Cool. So my name's Jason Spiller. I've been in esports for about 15 years now around the globe, working in Europe, the US, and Southeast Asia primarily. And initially for the World Cyber Games all those years ago when that was actually a thing. It no longer is, but good times were had. More recently, I served as the category lead for gaming for Microsoft and Xbox, and now I serve as the lead for esports and gaming at Omen for Hewlett-Packard. So that's a little bit about me.
And I'm Duane Mutu, so I'm one of the directors of Let's Play Live. We're a Australasian esport media company that creates content and events within the space. And my corporate, like Jason, we've crossed paths throughout our years. So I spent about 10 years working with on the publisher side. So working in PR, marketing, and then commercially looking after some of the biggest brands that sit out there with EA, Warner Brothers, Disney, etc. So definitely know a lot around the scope of gaming. And then in the more recent times, in the last couple of years, more specifically to the esports genre within the space.
Hello, my name is Kim. I'm deaf and I'm using an interpreter today, so that's why we've got interpreters here. I'm the General Manager of Techable Trust, and I focus on advancing accessibility services for disabled people in New Zealand. I'm interested in esports and accessibility in that area, especially about making gaming more inclusive for people with disabilities, especially in esports area. Thank you.
Fabulous. So I said I'd say something about my connection to this industry. I own a PR agency which caters for companies that make video games. But a long time ago, I was in the media business and I was publishing a magazine called PC Zone in the UK. And in 1998, we decided that we were going to hold the first ever national competition for competitive gaming, and we called it the PC Games Championships. And we got some decent sponsorship, and we had games like, I think it was Quake 3 Arena and Unreal Tournament, and all of those classic early arena shooters. And we had a winner, and the industry being what it was back then, we had a page 3 supermodel giving the prizes out. It was typical of the industry in the late 90s, not something we should be very proud of now. But the thing that will stick with me is the fact that we tried to get coverage of this event on TV, and we couldn't get anybody interested in it at all from the national media. So we had this idea of applying to Sport England, who were the kind of body that governs sports in the UK. We were going to apply for esports to be registered as an official sport. And what happened was, not only did they not recognise it as a sport, but they wouldn't even send us an application form. We were so kind of disgusted by this that this became the news story that we needed. And my business partner at the time, Ed, ended up on the national news at 10 p.m. With a very scared guy from the British Olympic Committee, with everybody desperately trying to backtrack. And we had a formal apology, and we were sent the application form to be registered as a sport, and it was rejected immediately. But it was an enormous struggle back then to get anybody interested in esports. It was absolutely massive. We had a company that I co-founded called csports.net, where we were gathering statistics from servers and ranking players globally. We had several million people we were tracking every single day playing Counter-Strike, particularly at that time. But we could not get any capital investment whatsoever. It was just viewed as this really weird thing that was never going to go anywhere. So things have changed an enormous amount. And, in many ways, I think the industry has come on leaps and bounds, but there are still huge hurdles and huge challenges to overcome. So this is what we're going to be discussing today. And I'd like to start by asking Ben, as kind of a leadership figure in this area in the ANZ region, to give us a bit of an overview of where the industry is right now in eSports.
Okay, so I'd like to speak more about where things are in terms of eSports, probably similar to what you're talking about in terms of recognition and things, rather than getting onto the commercial side of the eSports more. Actually, the situation in New Zealand is pretty much as you've just described it, as it was in 1998. We've had conversations with Sports NZ and also the New Zealand Olympic Committee. Basically, the guy at Sports NZ, they didn't really want to know about it. They just said it's not our place. We're not going to do this. And they told me we don't recognise sports and we don't recognise these kinds of things. A few weeks later, they recognised the MMA Federation. So it's been a very difficult conversation. I've had direct contact with ministers and spoken to some pretty high up people. And I think that there is a sea change coming in that. But the reaction we had from the New Zealand Olympic Committee was pretty similar. They didn't even want to talk to us until me, probably one of the advantages of being a lawyer, read their own constitution and quoted it back to them. And then suddenly they wanted to talk to me. And they are now accepting our application, which we'll hopefully be putting in October. Part of the problem is that at the higher level, at the international level, we're a member of the International eSports Federation. We're currently an associate member. We're looking to become a full member. And they are in conversation right now. So the way it works is to become a member of the Olympic Committee, you first have to become a member of an organisation called Sport Accord. And Sport Accord is a much broader group than Olympic sport. And you become a member of that, and then once you get admitted there, you sign up to a whole lot of procedures around drug testing and doping and all that kind of thing, which we've already done, and then you go to the Olympic Committee. So until that process has gone through, it could be quite difficult for us in New Zealand to get home and become an associate member of the Olympic Committee. I guess there's maybe some people do wonder, is this a path we should be going down? Should we, in terms of esports, be trying to become a sport, or is it something different? And I think we all recognise it is something different. The challenge is that unless you're a sport, it's very hard to get funding at an amateur level for, things like the E-Blacks that we have, sending them overseas and having them sort of recognised as a representative team. That's not going to happen unless we are seen as a sport. And with the way things are heading, we'll then have access to, high performance centres, all that kind of training that would be there for esports athletes. So I think, right or wrong, philosophically, whether it's right, the reality is that if you want the sport to develop, then that's really a path we have to go down. The E-Blacks, I think, are a great thing that we've got going. They went over and represented New Zealand last year at the IESF World Championships in Jakarta. It was a challenge. We got the teams together at the last minute, but it was great to have us represented there. And I think it's a brand that could grow and become, recognised. We've got some idea of maybe being able to work with the All Blacks and maybe get some branding around that. Great way for them to maybe get into Asia, increase their profile there. So that's really where things sit, I guess, on an advocacy and recognition point of view, I guess. In terms of, us internally, we've got the rules of our association. So we're an incorporated society in New Zealand, a non-profit organisation. We've also developed some regulations, some stuff around being able to sanction events. Also, and part of that is that obviously you sign up to the regulations we've got, and those regulations also deal with things like dispute resolution. We ask that there be, encouraging diversity around gender and ethnicity, and talking to Kim as well. around people with disabilities and making sure it's accessible to them. And those are all things that, we want to encourage in the industry. Talking to Kim before, it's a great leveler in a lot of ways, in terms of disabilities. It's great to see more and more women getting involved. There was a team in the HSL, wasn't there, there was an all-woman team, I believe, entered in that. So that was a great thing to see, and that's something we really want to encourage. It's obviously now a male-dominated sport. I think that's
maybe I can also just leverage on and talk a little bit about the landscape in terms of what we currently have in New Zealand and largely Australia. We tend to be about 5 to 10 years behind our Australian counterparts, and even further behind Europe and the US in terms of cultural adoption and in terms of what we have in terms of infrastructure. And a lot of people have started to look very closely at esports after the recent Intel Extreme Masters in Sydney. Of course, it's a big marquee event, and I saw a lot of articles about how esports had arrived, or esports had suddenly sprung up out of nowhere in Australia and New Zealand, which couldn't be further from the truth. If you look at what Australia has done, Australia built very strongly with some very strong leaders in terms of Nick Van Zeddy being probably one of the most well-known in ACL, so the Australian Cyber League. And for years and years, these guys built and grew from sort of their backyard LAN events right up into the point where they were a national organisation with consistent online leagues, and understanding that you can't loop and group esports in together. There's a whole lot of different disciplines within esports, of course. Somebody that plays Counter-Strike and plays the Counter-Strike season isn't necessarily also going to be a League of Legends player. And so they had an understanding that they needed to focus on certain disciplines and make sure there was a consistency and growth of that discipline. And it got to the point where ESL got involved, got interested, and bought ACL, and Nick Van Zeddy now sits as the head of ESL Australia and New Zealand. But it's an example of what New Zealand hasn't quite done. In a lot of ways, we haven't done the legwork yet. There was a point in our time where we had done the legwork. We were getting up to 1,000-person events 10 years ago with XLAN, and we had a very vibrant community and a very vibrant growth in terms of the scene and the sport, and it's disappeared largely. We have new players in the market like Duane's Let's Play Live, who are working at it from a mainstream inclusionary level, which is amazing. And we also have a lot of endemic players that are trying to build it up from the grassroots. But culturally, there's a difficulty in New Zealand that we're actually, strangely enough, such a digital society. And part of that is the fact that our population is so sparse. We are very, very spread out. Other than Auckland, if you look at the rest of the country, we're quite isolated. And so that's driven online behaviour, as well as our lack of content has driven online behaviour in terms of Netflix. So people are used to buying online, they're used to playing online, and as a result, they don't tend to come out and support events. And I know Duane can talk about it as well. It's very hard to get people out there to actually sit and watch esports in New Zealand. And part of that is just we haven't seen the cultural shift. We haven't built that culture of going out and supporting it. It's disappeared somewhere along the way. The Australians have done a good job of it. The Europeans have done an even better job of it, partially because they are very connected. The countries are obviously easy to move around in. The US is the same. It's got a huge population. And so population counts against us a little bit. So the landscape is an interesting one. You have a lot of isolated events. You have a lot of one-term leagues, but there's very little consistency in terms of discipline as we move across the year. There's no consistent seasonal approach. We're starting to see some League of Legends seasons with the HCS and with the Let's Play Live League of Legends seasons that are consistent and growing. And that's a bonus, and we need to see more of that to the point where there's a bit of an entitlement factor as well that I see in New Zealand audiences, that because we're so digitally enabled and digitally connected, we're watching the international, we're watching the League of Legends champs, we're watching all of these big, amazing, incredible events. And we want that here, and we expect that when we come out to an event, that's what we should come to. We should come to a Vector or a Spark Arena filled with people, but we haven't done the legwork to get there. So that growth is what we need to do as a community, as an industry, with players, with supporters, as well as sort of the industry figures. So it's an interesting space to be in. And we sit very curiously on a precipice. Is that we're getting to the point now where non-endemic brands are quite interested in what's happening, right? So previously, support came primarily from the Logitechs, the Samsungs, the Microsofts, the Sonys of the world, who had a very vested interest in making sure that esports players bought their product. But now we're seeing it as an advantage for non-endemic players. Red Bull, Budweiser, Bud Light now is huge into esports. And those non-endemic players are coming in and are now ready to invest in money. And so there's an onus on existing players to make sure that the ROI there is sustainable, and that the money and the effort that they're putting in is also going to be sustainable over the long term, that ROI is delivered proportionally. That, in all honesty, we sort of preface it with saying, right, we have this level of event, this is the state of the industry, put in this level of investment, and we'll get there, we'll grow. It's going to be a 5-year play, a 10-year play to get to the point where we've got a stadium and we're hosting an Intel Extreme Masters or a similar style of event. So it's on a precipice, and if that ROI equation doesn't sort of level out for players in the next couple of years, it could lead to another crash like the US saw with the Cyber Pro League all those years ago. So it's a concern, I think, and something that everybody needs to have a look at that's got an interest in the space. So I suppose that's kind of a bit of a lay of the land from another perspective in terms of where esports is.
Cool. So do you think that there is a way, because New Zealand is slightly behind the curve, that New Zealand can avoid making some of the mistakes that have unfortunately plagued esports as it's grown elsewhere in the world? I mean, it is in a way, is it an advantage for us to be able to come in later and do things in a slightly different way?
Yeah, look, I think a couple of points to probably address, from what Jason was saying, which is really important, I think, is, and I understand it from both sides. We're talking about kind of, if you look at Let's Play Live and sort of this top kind of mass audience kind of growth versus kind of what is, the traditional community groups, they do have to work in conjunction, right? Like, I think we all understand that. But the one thing that must be thought about, which is always hard to look at, is around the dollars and cents, like Jason sort of alluded to, right? So one of the things is with Xland and those types of events that come and gone, Digital Nations, all those events that existed there was because there wasn't enough money in the space. So you're never going to get, and I sit there in a lot of meetings regarding dollars into the space. They don't want to come and invest in sort of 1,000 people. That's the issue that you've got. And this will kind of lead into your point around what we're talking about. How is it sustainable? Look, the reality is that it has to be to a wider audience. So some would think that the strategy of, say, for Let's Play Live, trying to go to that mass market, well, in actual fact, that's the only way that you're going to get mass saturation. If you ask me personally whether we should be on TV, like linear TV on Sky or those types of things, absolutely not. But if you don't get onto those mass platforms like Twitch, we had the 15th largest Twitch stream on for Tekken 7-hour event that was on Wednesday in the world. 2,500 concurrent viewers, so very strong. But you look at, say, a Sky Sport, and you're talking between 40 and 60,000 people in New Zealand. So if you're a sponsor and you come in, I mean, Jason sat there from a Microsoft perspective. If you come there and said, okay, what am I going to invest the money in? Am I going to invest it in 1,000 people? And this is where the disconnect is am I going to invest 1,000, to 1,000 people playing on a LAN event in a hall, and it could be fantastic. We even call that 5,000 people. That's fantastic. But the sponsors don't want to invest in that sort of money because they're really about how do they get the mass reach, how do they get the more eyeballs on the product. So even if I come to them and say, look, here is our Twitch property, they go, and we said we're the 15th best in the world. We've got these great, we're the fastest growth page for our League of Legends event in this part of the world for Twitch. I believe when we're doing live events, that's Twitch's information, they're going, that's fantastic, but a sponsor still looks and goes, that's still not enough. And that's the real issue. When you put it on Sky, and again, locked off platform, we don't like that. It probably doesn't sit with traditional, esports audiences. It's more about creating the opportunities because all of a sudden you've got 60,000 people watching your event, right? So that's probably where the landscape is and where you go, okay, I get it, like I sort of see why these guys going here and trying to do it. And I totally agree with Jason that the community groups are there. It's not kind of new. It's how do you put those together, right? Because how do you take the money at the top with what we're doing here, and how do you put that back into the community group? So that's probably, where we have those learnings that you've got to go with, right? The other bit about it, commercially, I guess, from a business perspective, is what is going to happen. And, I've had these conversations with publishers, which is coming, and what people won't realize is that each of those publishers, and we talk about publishers, whether it be Riot or whether it be Bandai Namco or whoever it is, they are wanting to not have ESL. They're not wanting to have Let's Play Live. They're wanting to go more direct to their own consumers, and they're going to go out. So ESL, Let's Play Live, we're in a very tricky position because they're going to want to do it their own way. So, and that will actually impact everyone else that is sitting here that may just want to do a LAN event, because you're not going to be able to just go out and do a LAN event to 1,000 people and play Counter-Strike, or you're not going to be allowed to play League of Legends, because Riot will clamp down on that. And I've seen that just recently with NBA 2K. They pulled back on some people who have been doing some very good work in the market here and said, you're not going to be able to, we don't want you to do any more NBA 2K, because it's starting to become more heightened. So how do you protect LAN groups or community groups being allowed to actually go out and just do it, right? So that's going to be a real issue, is if you want to go out and do an event at for 1,000 people, if it's a Ping Zero or if it's an XLAN or if it's Digital Nation, they're going to have to go get the rights. We have to go get the rights. So we're actually dictated to by what the publisher wants to do. We don't do anything that you've seen so far for Let's Play Live without legal sign-off by the publisher. And that's actually going to be a model that you're going to see all the way, not just from us at the TV kind of top end, but right the way through to the community groups, if it's visible enough. And the more that we see, even like now, when people are watching this on video on stream, that they're going to see that visibility is going to be higher, and they're going to turn around and say, well, hold on, we don't want that to happen if it's an event. So I think those are some of the real challenges from a commercial rights holder perspective, and so then it's how do you address those issues? Yeah. And so the 2 points I kind of make on that is, we understand that money up here needs to be trickled down to the community. And so what we look at, and this is just our strategy on it, is looking at going, okay, there are community groups that exist that are very good, that have been here. Take Tekken 7 that we're doing at the moment, and the Standing Fierce group, who have been around for about 6-7 years. Fantastic organisation. If we were to just come in here and go, cool, we're just going to do these events, go online and do that event with the sign-off from Bandai, with sponsors coming involved, Standing Fierce would be the ones that would directly be impacted by us doing that, because the audience would think, I like Standing Fierce, but I'm going to go here because I might get on TV, I might get some money, I might get a trip to the Worlds. That's just human nature. So we talk about community, people are still fickle, right? So what I was mindful is, how do we connect those? So it's really about going, okay, let's Standing Fierce kind of go out, do their thing, see if we can help them in a way that gives their audience the opportunity to play against Saint this weekend, or whoever it might be, get the opportunity to go out, and then work it right through that. Then at that top level, we kind of go out and put it onto TV for the masses and help curate it throughout the industry. And then the other point around what Ben was raising earlier on is around regulation. And so what's happened at the moment is a lot of these events have had no sanctioning at all, and that's fine, right? So there's 2 people who can sanction events, any type of event. That's been the publisher and that's been the organizer. But because there's been a disconnect between the organizer and loosely the publisher, the organisers go out and say that's cool, but there's no protection for the player that comes into those events at that level, because there's no rule set around it apart from your general rules of engagement around gameplay. But over the overarching, if you think about that from a sport perspective, like rugby, and there's no rules and you went out there, then that's a dangerous place to be, because you'd have no rules to say what you can and can't do. And so that's why you look at something like the NZDSF and sort of saying, okay, here's a sanctioning opportunity. That's fantastic, because there is going to need to be a rule set. The publisher needs to offer rule sets and ban players to doing that. And then that will help the community feel safe. And as these kids come through, they can go to a safe environment. So that's kind of, I guess, my perspective on, a couple of those things.
Yeah. So it's clear that there are a lot of industry-wide issues with esports being relatively young. And those are kind of technical and legal issues and political issues that are shared globally. There are some issues specifically for New Zealand which are to do with scale. So, I mean, the New Zealand gaming industry, in the days where AAA ruled the world, it was pretty difficult working here because, publishers didn't have offices, distributors were representing in the marketplace here. So because the the market wasn't big enough to justify having dedicated resource. So part of the issue is that New Zealand is a small territory, so it's very difficult to have massive events well attended here because there simply isn't the population to support that. But I'd like to bring Kim in here because I see potentially if New Zealand can't have a large enough domestic market to make esports here grow successfully, is there any way that we could do something specialist? So what I would say, for example, to Kim is, could we take on a world championships here in a particular esport discipline for people with disabilities specifically? That would be the first time it had been done globally, and it would be something that New Zealand could found and own. Do you think that would be something that could work, Kim?
Yeah, I think it is possible, absolutely. Because what we have is between finding our place in the world in terms of sports, and underneath the Olympic umbrella, you've got the Paralympics as well, and Special Olympics, and everything else in there. And where would esports fit under that? So finding a way to make it unique, making it something specialized. I'm making a big event like esports underneath the umbrella in the same way that Paralympics and Special Olympics are for disabled people in esports. Would be a good idea. In New Zealand, we don't have much involvement in gaming and League of Legends. It's more Call of Duty or CSGO. There's not much deaf involvement, thank you, or disability involvement within those games. So we have to start small, really, and get those people to initially join in. And what will happen then is that, similar to what's happened in New Zealand with poker, because just the general game poker I'm bringing up at the moment, I'm using it as a good example. What they've done is I'm using it as a model. They've done really well to start with a couple of people, just 5 people to begin with, and over time, it's actually grown the amount of people who played poker to 100 people, deaf people, playing poker. And those people are actually going over to Australia to play poker, and it's growing there. So that's a model that worked well for poker. We still have a little bit of issues with accessing the mainstream esports, which would be my top priority as I'm an advocate, and trying to fit in within the mainstream model how to get into the initial picture.
Cool, thank you very much.
I'm actually really curious to see whether the way in, potentially to start off with, is to look at ways to make international broadcasts more accessible to people with disabilities in order just to start to grow sort of the attention and the initial interest. Because I'm curious, I've never considered it from this point of view, I suppose. I'm curious to see whether those broadcasts are already quite, sort of, for example, deaf-friendly. I've never personally seen a lot of esports broadcasts with captions. And maybe that's a potential way where we could start leading in terms of the rebroadcasting.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, just like to comment on what Ben and I were talking about outside, how got Twitch live streaming services, there's no captioning on there. So it can be hard to follow what's going on, what's happening. Whereas with regular sports, there tend to be captions available on regular sports. And when there's breaks and the broadcasters are commenting on the game, there's captions there as well. So it'll be good if we can get captions included into a format like Twitch, for example.
Yeah. So to kind of address the game developers specifically in the audience here, we've seen a whole set of different trends over the years as esports has developed, and the different kind of silos of esports categories and titles that grow and fade. So one of the things which some of the friends that I have who have been in and around the professional player level is their disappointment that they fear that the esports categories that are going to ultimately be successful are the ones which the sports authorities find easiest to understand, rather than actually cater to the real kind of skills that esports people bring to the table. So, for example, although we all love Rocket League, it seems strange that Rocket League, just because it was so simple to understand, would become one of the most widely supported sports, or something like NBA, because it's just modelling a real sport. It's easy to understand. It's easy for the sports authorities to understand. So, are there opportunities for New Zealand developers to come up with products in the esports market which are going to be more palatable to sports organisations and broadcasters and sponsors, more inclusive of players with disabilities, for example, and which still play to those enormous skills that we know that players at a professional level have?
So look, you did right. Like, I think if you look at, just take, for example, we've done sort of different categories of broadcast in this country, and this will probably mirror what happens around the globe. So we've done, League of Legends, which is your mobile. We've done a shooter with Call of Duty. And these are all on traditional broadcasts as well as Twitch. We've just done NBA 2K, which is your true sports sim, one of the best games. And we're doing Tekken 7 right now. And when you look at it from a purely a broadcast perspective, anecdotally in some of the research, you're absolutely right. The NBA type games translate so much easier to TV because that audience understands innately what's happening, but the skill level is clearly not as high as what's happening with League of Legends. But League of Legends is a longer game in format, minimum, 22 minutes, right up to about an hour per game, best of 3 or 3 hour broadcast. So some of that's very hard to digest, which is why globally they're kind of constraining it, and why, taking those type of games from your traditional online platforms into TV is always, that's the hardest piece of it. But I believe, so that's just sort of some, anecdotal stuff, but I think there's 3 key categories for game developers that I think is going to absolutely happen around the globe. So you've got your core gaming, and that's, your highly skilled League of Legends, MOBAs, big titles, your CSGOs that will always be there, and games will come and go out of that particular genre, and they will always be seen as your, the absolute pinnacle for gamers. What you'll see is, what you talked about and alluded to is, and this is probably where the strength will be, because it's very hard to make a AAA title that resonates. I mean, you've got big brands out there trying to do it all the time, whether it be Activision and so on, trying to always find the next big esport game. But if you look at the sport genre, that will explode, because it's easier to watch for broadcasters. People know how to do it. You've got a far bigger casual audience that can pick up and play those types of games. And then you're going to have the bit that people are missing is the star power. So you look at the NBA launching 19 of their 30 teams are going to have an NBA E-League team. Madden's doing it this year with 30 players. FIFA's doing it. Now, when you're talking about audiences of LeBron James, Kobe Bryant, Lionel Messi driving the youth, that category is going to explode. And the broadcasters understand what they're getting. So you look at Madden, they know what they're getting. They're getting a virtual version of the football. And so broadcasters can break that down and take that too. So that middle category is probably, and like you said, to the Rocket League kind of point, variations of the sports games are easier to consume, probably easier for Kiwi developers to make those types of games and be able to translate those. And then the third category is your mobile gaming. And, this data is all, backed up by Newzoo and all those types of global research companies. But the third one will be mobile, which is ginormous. And obviously the esports element of that is becoming huge as well. So those are the 3 that I see happening. I think for New Zealand game developers to be sitting between mobile and sort of these mirrored sports type sims will actually be a really strong place for them to be in the future.
There's a couple of things that when it comes to development and the choices and the design decisions that you're making when you're creating a game. You're right. Like there's always a trade-off. Like complexity, easy to learn, hard to master, is always going to be offset with a watchability issue, right? If you look at something like League of Legends, it's a very complex game to watch, and I don't think a lot of work has been done in creating the tools and whether it's an overlay, whether it's observer, pings, whatever it is, to make it easier to watch as well and to understand. So there's a lot of work that goes into that after the title's released rather than design decisions that are made during development. The other thing that you're going to find, especially when trying to pitch it to mainstream audiences, I'm finding a lot from my role and sort of looking at it from a sponsorship perspective, it's becoming harder and less palatable to sponsor violent games, and that's becoming a thing again. And so that's something that you do have to consider is if you are looking at creating something with a level of violence that for a TV audience or for another audience, that's going to be a little bit harder to pitch. There's a great game, obviously Sky Noon, that I'm sure most of you have seen, that kind of gets around the violent aspect and still has a level of skill, I think, that's interesting at least. So that's some points to consider.
Yeah, can I just say too, like with the HSL we did with that was done with League of Legends. I mean, that definitely would never have happened with Call of Duty or CS:GO or any of those games. We just would never have gotten in the door to the schools. So that is going to be an issue, and I really agree with what you're saying about the violence in the games. And I think there's also perhaps an element of wanting to seeing traditional sports, eSports, being more encouraging of especially children actually, getting out and doing sports as well. So obviously, I'm sure you're not surprised to hear that we do run into a bit of a barrier in terms of advocacy and, you're just encouraging kids to sit inside and not do any exercise. So there's always that part to address. And that is why, like with the NBA and also the Adelaide Crows has just bought an OPL team. They're seeing these traditional sports clubs are seeing this as a way to boost their support. So we get involved in esports, people start to support the brand, because at the end of the day, if you support a team like the Lakers, what are you really supporting? You're supporting a T-shirt, aren't you? I mean, the players may change, the coach may change, some of those, even the city may change, but you'll keep supporting the jersey. So if they also have that jersey associated with an esport, that will grow their support for the jersey. And so with millennials, they're finding that is a great way to engage them in the traditional sports. So that's probably also why you're going to see the traditional sport, esports, grow a little bit faster. There is more of an appetite for it. Right or wrong, I don't know. I mean, I guess it's.
I think you're right. It's going to be really fascinating actually to see whether the bets that have been made by traditional sports teams are going to pan out, and they're going to see that transition and that shift in terms of audience who are watching League of Legends to support some of their other sporting teams. I think that's going to be really fascinating to watch over the next 5 years.
I mean, the NBA E-League is definitely aimed at the Asian market and getting more buy-in to those teams. And maybe you'll see the same thing with football and, who knows, rugby and rugby league and sports like that. So,
cool. So, do we therefore think that we're not really, as game developers, looking for the next killer combination of mechanics that could propel a game to the top of the esports world? We're actually looking more at effectively making compromise games mindfully that are going to help grow esports in general. So in other words, being more palatable for sponsors and being more understandable, being more appealing to the folks who have the money to invest in professional teams, which at the moment does seem to be like big American sports franchises. We have to be sanguine as an industry. Do you think if you are the manager of a studio, should people be looking towards making something which is hugely marketable rather than hugely appealing because of its game mechanics?
I think at a high level, at a really high level, you just need to add another question to your development cycle. And the first question you're always going to ask in a game is it fun to play, right? Like, because if it's not fun to play, why would you play it? But I think another question needs to be asked during the development phase is it fun to watch? And if you cover both of those, the challenges aside, if it's fun to watch as well as fun to play, it will succeed. You will find the support eventually, and it will happen. But you've got to ask that question right from the ground up. Is your entire team sitting there watching people play, going, "This is an amazing experience. I love doing this. Let's grab another beer." Or are they watching for 10 seconds and going, "Cool, yep, looks fun. I really want to go play it as well." So I think that's another question that really needs to be asked.
So, do the panel think that there is going to be any kind of consolidation in the Asia-Pacific region where esports is concerned? Because of this problem of scale for New Zealand, is it going to be of huge value for New Zealand to very closely align itself with Australia or maybe even some of the Southeast Asian territories?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. I think one of the things that we've seen throughout the tournaments and what you see with Kiwi fans is the biggest thing you ask esport fans in this country is having the opportunity to compete or go outside. So they always say there hasn't been enough pathways to overseas, and that's either come because there's not enough money to send someone up, there's not really the opportunity, there's also the server ping, all the rest of it. I mean, League of Legends, used to be out of the North American kind of server. Of course, there's no hope down here. So no one's really had the chance to see how good New Zealand is, but the strength still lies with the publisher. And so the key is probably, like you said, is in those small markets that the top players want to play against the best, and they want that opportunity to play against the best. So it's aligning with the publisher. So you see what sort of Riot's is a very good model, because globally most people recognise that Riot and League of Legends are sort of the marquee kind of publisher of what they've been able to do, or one of the top in the world of how they've been able to do it. Then you have this Australian OPL league, and the winner of the OPL now gets to go up to Worlds and get a chance to take on Faker and SKT. So how do you get a New Zealand team to get that opportunity? How do you get Kiwi players involved in the OPL? And that sort of same model would probably exist ideally across all of them. So yeah, I agree that I think it's a consolidated approach. And like Jason touched on earlier, is everything at the moment is too piecemeal. We have an event here, people have an event there. It's not sustainable. It has to be aligned to global, and the pathway needs to be quite clear all the way through. Now, Ben alluded to one pathway in time will be that Olympic type offering, that national team, and that will be fine. Maybe that gets ginormous, maybe it doesn't, but the reality is the strength to me will always be with, say, the super teams and the superpowers and the LOLs and the publishers. So therefore you want to align also that way, that where's the Kiwis' opportunity to come out and how do you go? So I think, 100% need to align across Asia Pacific for that. Yeah.
I tend to wonder personally about the nationalistic approach and whether that works. And I'm really keen to see. I think we've got a great example. We've got a great testing ground that's coming up. And what I mean by nationalistic approach is city-based teams, country-based teams. I've seen it done before. It's been done in the past, and I'm curious to see whether it'll work again. And we'll have a great example. We'll have the Overwatch League, who Blizzard are taking that route. They're taking the city-based route. And we'll also have a really good comparison in League of Legends, which continues to use sort of boundaryless endemic teams. And I think there's an opportunity for New Zealand to look wider. Like, what you're doing with Let's Play Live, it doesn't necessarily need to be just New Zealand. Like, no. The broadcast can totally go global. And I think that's going to be the key is, rather than maybe sort of sending us here, but looking at ways to consolidate and look globally so that we can move out. We can have brands and presences that have global resonance. We can have a Cloud9 based here or an Immortals based here or something like that. And I think that's going to be an interesting way to look at it.
Yeah.
But equally as so, there's Olympic potential. Maybe the nationalistic route is going to work. So. I don't know. I think it's going to be an interesting thing to watch unfold over the next couple of years to see whether that's going to happen, whether people in cities get behind teams and we get behind a national thing, or whether esports players continue to support these boundaryless international squads and super teams. So it'd be really interesting to see how it unfolds in the next couple of years.
Yeah, I agree.
Cool. So it's 11:25 now. So there is a 10-minute recess to go and get a cup of coffee and perform your ablutions. If we can come back in here in 10 minutes' time, and then if we open the conversation up to you guys so that you can ask questions and as difficult and as challenging as possible. So thank you very much. Hello, welcome back to the second half of the reggae. Excellent. Welcome back to the second half of the session. There was a couple of things that Kim wanted to say that we didn't quite squeeze in. So if I can, before we have questions, if I can just hand over to Kim.
Thank you. So I was just talking about ping was the issue that I brought up with the guys and how it affects us. So a good example is if we're involved in a team here gaming, for whatever game it happened to be, say World of Warcraft, and we're going up against, say, 10 years ago, say we're going up against an American team. The issue is that we are quite behind when it comes to big teams because all the big teams are based in America. And all the America's servers is like I said, in America. And for us, we're stuck behind because we have to link into their servers. We've got no infrastructure here to really match the ping that those guys get. And so what happens is that those who compete here in New Zealand may feel like they've got they lose a couple of things because international companies and their servers with what they want to do. We need to get them to bring their servers here into New Zealand. That allows us to improve the ping and get us onto a even playing field with those in America.
Yeah, that's a very important point. So anyway, if we can open up to questions, has anybody got a question they'd like to ask?
Hey, how's it going? So thank you very much for sharing all the different perspectives. It's been really interesting to sort of hear how people look at things and the approaches that they take towards things as well. I'm curious to sort of see what you think about, it was noted earlier on that New Zealand hasn't necessarily got the population density to be able to pack out full stadiums. So is there some way that we can transition away from that thinking and towards like actually utilising the strengths that we do have, which is in the high uptake of people using the internet, and actually move towards kind of a more distributed model and perhaps look at, rather than looking at what's happening overseas and saying we want to do that too, maybe seeing if we can find a new way forward?
I really think that that's the way to go. And one of the models that I really, really liked from Europe was sort of the take TV and the base trade TV type models of invitational tournaments to start to get players there. And they were very simple. They were small scale in terms of what they were, but they had huge online reach. So there's just a couple of pro players that have been invited from around the globe. They're put into a house and play out the tournament. So it didn't require a big production budget. That budget was put into the T&E essentially, and you've got a huge online base. And I think that'd be quite cool from two perspectives. Is it would start to put New Zealand on the map from bringing some larger names down. It would also give Kiwis a chance to build a bit of a profile against some larger players. And I think that's a way to start looking broader, using our strengths, our digital strengths, because the more we do online, the more we do through Twitch, the better we are. I don't think that New Zealand will ever be a place personally that will pack out a 40,000 person stadium. It's probably not on the cards for us. But are we a place that can really produce high quality invitationals, high quality local talent, and then package that for the globe? Totally. I think we can 100% do that.
Could I totally agree with what you're saying and working to strengths, although I must say, you know, when there were a couple of LPL events and I went along to the finals, and it was just at Sky City Theatre with maybe a few hundred people, but, you know, to feel that buzz of a whole lot of people together in one room when we did this Call of Duty tournament and we had the Warriors against the Breakers and there were guys chanting the Warriors and you know, doing all that kind of thing. I mean, I think there's something that goes with that. And and I agree it'll be a challenge, but I mean, if you can get a whole lot of people together in a room, I think the energy is quite exciting. If you can get along to the Tekken event that we're going to have, I think you'll feel that. And you see those stadiums in Korea with 50,000 people in a stadium watching esports. I mean, it must be an amazing experience if when you have a passion for it. Yeah. So I agree with you totally. But I mean, it would be nice to see some big events where people could get together and feel that collective love for what you're passionate about. I think that's something that's pretty cool.
Or maybe it's a great opportunity for a local developer to create a solution where online we can really share in that buzz and that interactivity. I mean, we've started to see Twitch extensions, and maybe that's a really nascent, tiny form of what can eventually become a great way to keep things exciting and interactive and transfer a small portion of that stadium feel maybe. It could be a way to go.
Yep.
Yeah. Cool. Also, I guess on the extensions side of things, there could be an opportunity to improve accessibility. As we know, there are several platforms that have technical obstacles for players with disabilities, particularly with hearing disabilities, who can't wear a headset and communicate with team members. But there are surely some clever, easy wins for developers to improve this accessibility without enormous development cost. Kim, would you agree?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. For example, say you've got a game developed and you want to input a video in screen system. So that way you can sign quick for someone like me who signs. You can sign quickly into a screen that's already on the video game itself, instead of having to use a different avenue. So there's a huge advantage in being able to see what's happening with your partner in Twitch competitions, where you don't need to have two screens available. You can just stick the secondary screen into a little screen on the first screen to begin with, and have a picture-in-picture sort of setup. Yeah. So that's definitely a way we could go.
Cool. Another question?
Hi, I'm one of those entrepreneurial types interested in starting a studio and solving some of the interesting problems that you all bring up. I have a small funding issue. I don't suppose any of you know of any organizations or individuals that would be interested in investing in a startup.
Come talk to me later.
Of this nature. You okay?
Yeah. Yes, it's like a bunch of one of those investment reality TV shows. Any other questions?
Hey, just a quick question, mostly for game developers. Have you guys found an advantage to having short rounds, like 5 or 10 minute games, compared to having 30, 40, 50 and beyond, as far as retention for viewers and how engaged the audience is?
Yeah, like personally, definitely. And, I think that resonates globally with the sort of broadcast kind of model, especially what people, like when you're looking at TV particularly, the engagement rate's short. I mean, even if you look at social media, everything's sort of bite-sized. I like to take in that sort of those short chunks. Yes, the League of Legends people have time on Twitch. You can spend long times watching those games. But yeah, absolutely, the shorter games are better. Like Tekken right now is 9 minutes max, and on average, I think we're about 6 minutes. People find that very engaging. NBA was really quick too, when we've done those types of games, and that's kind of to those earlier points we're talking about from broadcasters like that. Whereas League of Legends, far more skilled, arguably, bigger audience base, but longer and harder to digest. So shorter, quicker games is better.
Or take the round structure.
Yeah.
Like CSGO works really well like that. The bite-sized rounds, but over the course of a larger game, allows for a bit of a meta game in between rounds. You get that economy sort of coming up that becomes an interesting point in itself. So it's a kind of a nice, easy way to break it up. Small 2-minute rounds, but you can still get a half-hour broadcast or an hour-long broadcast if you need. Yeah.
Another question?
My question is about visibility for the esports scene, because some of the Let's Play Live stuff, I happened to stumble upon it, especially when you guys, you'd done a broadcast on Sky, and the only way I found out about that was by accident. Do you guys find that you have a visibility problem, especially in letting people know when things are happening in the esports scene? Like, this is the first I've heard of the HSL. I know a few people that'd be interested in that. What are your thoughts around visibility for esports?
Yeah, I think there's like probably two answers in the question. Is one is, I guess if you look at it from like what we talked about, is trying to go, okay, a small market, a small esports market, but we know that there's 98% of Kiwis game, right? So you've got to look at it both male, female, the whole way across the age group. So when we approached it from a strategic point of view, we're like, right, we need to break down the barriers that Ben and Jason that talked about as far as who's engaged in it, coming from the gaming. From the, I guess, the publisher side, you'd always ask people, I'd say to people, are you a gamer? And then most of them go, no, unless they are a gamer, right? And then they say, yeah, I'm a gamer. But the reality is it's a stereotype perception. And when you go out to the masses, that's where there's a real issue for sponsorship, for viewership, for all those things, because they don't really want to be associated with, isn't this like geek gamers? And as we know, the data doesn't talk to that. We actually know that's a myth. It's just not true. So when we talk about Let's Play Live, what we're actually trying to do to start with, and whether our strategy is right or wrong, we believe that's a way to break down some of those barriers. And like Jay said, I'm not here to comment on whether that's the right way to go to start with, but what we've done is gone to a traditional media forum opposed to a core forum, and that has impacted us. And so that, to your point, do you think we've got visibility to the core? Absolutely not. I think we need to do a better job working with the communities, and we need to do a better job working with core publications, all those things that sort of Jason talked about, where we're very weak, to be honest with you, but where we're strong, and some would argue we're better staying up there at the moment, is, I get, we have our Tekken event right now. We've got 5 major radio stations. I know I'm probably in here listening to radio, but there's a lot of people that do radio sport, twice, rock radio, George FM, the list goes on. Then we've got, TV ads on Sky. We've got AM, the project show. So from traditional PR, absolutely we're very strong, but that doesn't resonate into the core because a lot of the core don't sit on those platforms. So so that's kind of why we chose that strategy, to try to go for a mass market, try to go for all of New Zealand, and hope we pick up the casual consumer into our viewership, opposed to the core. But yes, we need to come from the ground up as well, now that we've kind of done an okay job at the top.
Perfect opportunity to ask a reflexive question is, where do you get your news on events and streams from?
Yeah, I'd say probably online social media would be the main.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, so...
and keeping up with the breadth of platforms is challenging, and it's quite fragmented. Yeah, Instagram, Twitter. We're starting to look at Discord more and more, and sort of instanced social media like Discord is becoming quite popular for communication. And I go for a lot of my news to various Discords that I now use, and it just continues to evolve and move. And it's a challenge to keep up with the times and make sure that you're moving with the population. So. It used to be that a good Reddit thread would go a long way, but no longer.
And just to speak to what Duane said, the generations that are coming behind are growing up watching games. So I heard a statistic a couple of years ago, which I found staggering, which was amongst the younger age group. I think it was gamers under 12. They spent more time watching people play games on YouTube than they spent playing games themselves. Yeah. And this generation is completely used to watching what they don't consider esports, because they're watching Minecraft or Terraria or whatever, but they are going to be conditioned to being entertained by other people playing video games. And I think that's an amazing opportunity for the esports industry to maximise.
Yes, and just on that point, and that goes back to my point around why I believe that general sports consumption is going to be strong. Because if you look at, and I'll just use anecdotally, I've got a son who's 9, plays 5 different traditional sports, and very good at those sports. And then to your point, he doesn't want. I can't get him to watch any traditional sport on TV, YouTube, anything. Just can't get them to watch the All Blacks, can't get them to watch the Warriors, but it's a bad analogy, but no one's watching them. But all he's doing is consuming video games. And so so when I talked to him about, let's say NBA, plays NBA 2K, very good basketball player, his aspiration, he said, if I don't make the NBA as a player, this is a 9-year-old, right? As a player, I can make it as an esport player. And then, you know, that's the research we're getting. So that's why this generation that's coming through, some of those will start to sort of expand quicker because they're not your true esport enthusiasts that we know them as today. And in 5 years, they're going to be 15 and they're going to be the ones we're talking about. And this whole genre will be created. So that's kind of just a nice illustration of what you're saying, you know?
Yeah. We've got time for one last quick question. Christina.
I don't know whether this has been already discussed in another session. So with the upcoming mobile esports, what Supercell is doing, what Tencent is doing within China, how is it they have already got 40 million DAU on their esports game? So how is it going to affect the esports scene when more and more you are actually getting more casual players into playing esports games now? Where do you think that will go, and how does that affect esports going forward?
That's an exciting move, actually. I
think so
that,
too.
Yeah, I really do. And you know, we know from Southeast Asia that the mobile is so strong. You go to the Philippines, you go to India, and mobile is the platform of choice for just about everything. There's two issues I think that need to be solved. And one is an aspirational issue, because at the moment it's very hard for a mobile gamer to become a superstar. And so that has to be solved. You've got a huge daily active user base, massive. And in order to keep that user base long term, you need to sort of build up an aspirational quality to that title. And the second thing, and I know that you'll be doing the question, is so hard to watch currently. And so the solution around how you actually have that, like I'm starting to think of, you know, like a stage setup, and there's two people with the phone, like how is it arranged? And so there are some questions there. Yeah. And that's an interesting point. And viewership in VR, I think, is going to be an exciting move in the next 10 years as well. So I think that's probably the way to solve it is the AR scenarios. So that'll be quite cool and quite curious to see. I think there's a huge addressable market there. Yeah. So once we figure out the issues.
Cool. Well, we're just about out.
Can I just make a follow-up point on what you meant? Recently, I was just shown before about the DRL Drone Racing League. I think you guys, it seems pretty cool, and I think that's a pretty good example of what we could be doing in the future in terms of esports, where we have something like myself, who's physically disabled, where that could become useful and become active by combining esports into a hybrid system and having that equality set up through the use of technology and physical sports. And it's interesting to make sports useful by using different tools such as mobile, Xbox, other systems, being able to explore the avenues that can come from those as well.
Brilliant. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt you again, but we've come to the end of the session. Thank you ever so much for coming along. It's been very interesting for me and great to meet our fantastic panel. So thank you very much indeed, guys.